For 3,000 years the armor was silent. 100 warriors came to them. 100 times the metal refused to breathe. Kings fell to their knees before the sanctuary and left empty-handed, and the galaxy's mightiest warriors, beings born for war, whose muscles were harder than steel, simply retreated because the armor refused to touch them. And then came a man. Weak. Wounded. Without a single drop of noble blood in his veins, by the standards of those who judged the worthy. And the armor lit up. For the first time in 300 years. The light was neither golden nor white. It was like the breath of a living being who had finally found the one they had been searching for their entire endless life. And at that moment, the entire galaxy held its breath, because no one, not a single ancient line, not a single prophet, not a single archivist, could explain why. To understand what happened that day, we must go back many centuries to where it all began, to a world forgotten by time, to a planet the ancients called Catherine Prime. Catherine Prime was a world at war. Not a war of conquest, but a war of survival. The planet orbited a dying star, whose light grew fainter with each passing millennium, and the creatures that inhabited it knew one simple truth. One day, the light would fade completely, and then the darkness would come, a race of predators that had waited for this moment for millions of years, hiding in the shadows between the stars. An ancient people calling themselves the Xantari built armor as their civilization's last hope. It wasn't just armor, it was a living being, forged from metal, capable of thinking, feeling, and choosing. The Xantari believed that when the darkness came, only one warrior could don this armor and become the guardian of the last light, the only one capable of closing the gates between their world and the abyss. But the armor was capricious. It didn't choose the strongest. It didn't choose the noblest. It sought something else, something the Xantari themselves didn't fully understand. One by one, the greatest warriors of the race came to the altar of armor. One by one, the armor remained cold, dark, lifeless. Centuries passed. The Xantari died out, never having found their guardian. Their civilization faded, leaving behind only legends and a single intact temple, hidden deep beneath the planet's surface, where the armor continued to wait in the darkness. Other races arrived over millennia. Rumors of the armor spread across the galaxy like wildfire. It was said that whoever donned it would become invincible, able to stand against entire fleets single-handed, capable of tearing apart space with their bare hands. And so, ambitious, greedy, and desperate beings from all corners of known space flocked to the temple, hoping to be the chosen ones. There were 99 of them. 99 warriors from dozens of different species, giants from high-gravity planets whose fists could crush stone, predatory hunters with senses sharper than lasers, philosopher warriors whose wisdom was almost divine, assassins whose hands were stained with the blood of thousands, kings, emperors, generals of countless wars. Each of them approached the armor with the confidence of a creature that knew it was worthy. Each time the armor remained dead. And then came the day that no one will forget. Jack Morton never wanted to be a hero. He was simply a soldier, one of millions scattered along the edges of human space, guarding a frontier considered insignificant by most of the galaxy. Humanity was a young race, barely out in the stars, still considered by most advanced civilizations a weak, primitive species. Children playing adult games. Jack was 34 years old. He had a scar across his left eyebrow from a mining accident in his youth, and eyes that had seen too much death for one man. He served in the Frontier Legion, a small, underfunded, nearly forgotten unit whose sole mission was to patrol the empty sectors of space where nothing was thought to ever happen. Until that happens. The Dark Fleet appeared without warning. The ancient predators, who had waited for millennia, finally sensed that the time had come. The light of dying stars across the galaxy was fading faster than scientists had predicted, and the boundaries between their world and reality began to thin in dozens of places simultaneously. One of these rifts opened right in the sector that Jack was patrolling. His ship, a small scout cruiser named Cassandra's Hope, wasn't designed to fight creatures capable of tearing apart the very fabric of space. When his sensors first detected the approaching darkness, not ships, but something stranger, something that moved as if space itself were bending around it, Jack knew he had only one choice. Escape was impossible. Darkness moved faster than light in those areas where reality thinned. Fighting would have been suicide. One man, one small ship against creatures that tore apart stars. But Jack did not run or surrender. He stayed in position, sent out an alert to all nearby human outposts, and when the darkness was so close that his sensors began to scream from the data overload, he did the only thing one weak man could do against the endless horror. He crashed into them. The explosion tore Cassandra's hope apart, but somehow, almost impossible. The collision created enough energy to temporarily close one of the rifts and delay the darkness advance for a few precious hours. Hours that gave time to evacuate the 3 nearest colonies. The watch that saved 12,000 lives. Jack should have died in that explosion. By every law of physics he knew, he should have turned to dust along with his ship. But he didn't die. The escape pod, automatically activated a split second before the ship's destruction, ejected his body into space, wounded, burned, on the brink of death, but alive. The pod drifted for 3 days before the Ancient. A forgotten beacon on the edge of the dying Catherine system picked up a distress signal and, obeying a program that had not been updated for thousands of years, sent a rescue protocol to the only living thing within light years, the Xantari Temple. When Jack woke up, he was lying on a cold stone floor in a darkness that seemed to have existed there since the beginning of time. His body screamed in pain. His ribs were broken. One lung had been punctured by a piece of shrapnel. Burns covered half his body, and he knew, with the cold, mechanical certainty of a soldier who had seen too many wounds, that without immediate medical attention, he had no more than a few hours to live. But something made him raise his head. Not heroism. Not courage. Just a quiet, stubborn voice inside him that always said the same thing in his darkest moments. It's not over yet. In front of him, in the center of a huge hall carved from black stone, stood a suit of armor. They weren't majestic. They didn't glitter with gold or adorned with precious stones, as some would expect from the legends. They were simple, dark, almost nondescript, metal darkened by time, covered in the dust of millennia, standing motionless, like the statue of a forgotten god. Jack didn't know the legend of this place. He didn't know the history of Xantari, didn't know about the 99 warriors who had come here before him. All he knew was that he was dying, and something in this hall felt alive. He crawled toward the armor. Every movement sent waves of agony through his broken body, but he kept crawling because it was the only thing he could do. He wasn't looking for strength. He wasn't looking for salvation. He just wanted not to die alone in the dark. When his trembling, bloody hand touched the cold metal of the armor's breastplate, the entire temple trembled. Light, warm, living, almost breathing, flared from the very heart of the armor, spreading across the hall in waves of golden radiance that no living being had seen in 300 years. Jack, shocked and hurt, staggered back, expecting an attack, expecting a trap, expecting anything but what actually happened. The armor began to move on its own. Slowly, almost tenderly, they opened like a blossoming flower, reaching out to the wounded man, not like a weapon seeking a bearer, but like something seeking salvation. As if 300 years of solitude in the darkness had finally come to an end, and this being of metal and ancient magic had finally found what it had been searching for all this time. Jack felt the armor envelop his body, not by force, not by coercion, but with a care that seemed almost maternal. The metal pressed against his broken ribs, and he felt warmth spread through his chest, stitching the wounds, stopping the bleeding, rebuilding damaged tissue at a rate that defied all known science. The pain disappeared. And then came the voices. Not words. Not exactly. These were images, emotions, fragments of memory that weren't Jack's, but somehow became part of his consciousness the moment the armor fully bonded with his body. He saw the faces of the Xantari, a race that had perished millennia ago, their hopes, their fears, their last desperate attempt to create something that would outlive their destruction. He saw the 99 warriors who had come before him. He felt their pride, their lust for power, their confidence in their own greatness. And he understood, with a clarity that pierced him to the core, why the armor had rejected each of them. They were looking for power. The armor was not looking for strength. They were looking for a victim. Not the strength of muscle or the sharpness of a blade. They sought a being willing to give everything, expecting nothing in return. A being whose last thought before dying was not of his own glory, not of his own survival, but of saving others. 99 of the galaxy's greatest warriors came to this altar, seeking strength for themselves. Jack came here, dying, after giving his life to save strangers he had never met and never would meet. He wasn't looking for armor. He simply stopped being afraid to die alone, doing what was right. And that's why the armor chose him. When Jack finally rose to his feet, pain-free for the first time in a long time, feeling the power coursing through his veins like electricity for the first time, he didn't feel triumph. He felt something else. Something deeper. A responsibility so overwhelming it almost crushed him. Because with the power of the armor came knowledge. The darkness was approaching. Not in months. Not in years. Rifts in reality were spreading across the galaxy at a terrifying rate, and what had happened in his sector, what he had thought was a random attack, was merely the first straw in a gathering storm that threatened to engulf all life in the universe. The ancient Xantari people created this armor as a last line of defense against this storm. But no warrior, no matter how powerful, could stop the end of the world alone. Jack knew this. And yet he did not hesitate. Because somewhere deep inside him, in the same place where he'd made the decision to crash into the dark ship, knowing it would kill him, there was a simple, unshakable truth shared by millions before him, soldiers and mothers, doctors and teachers, ordinary people faced with extraordinary circumstances. If there was a chance, no matter how small, to save others, that chance had to be taken. Not because he was confident of victory. Not because he wasn't afraid. Because the alternative, standing by, knowing I could have done something, was more unbearable than death itself. The armor, now completely fused with his body, seemed to understand this thought better than Jack himself could express. The light within it grew stronger, and he felt the ancient power of Xantari acknowledge him, not as a warrior worthy of power, but as a soul worthy of trust. Word of the armor's awakening spread across the galaxy faster than anyone could have predicted. The ancient races, who had been monitoring the temple for centuries through their intelligence networks, were shocked. Emperors sent ambassadors. Scholars demanded explanations. War councils were convened urgently, for the legend said that the awakening of the Guardian of the Last Light meant only one thing. The end of times was approaching faster than anyone had expected. But it was not the awakening of the armor that shook the galaxy most. They were shocked by who wore them. A human. A being from a young, weak, almost forgotten race, considered by most to be barely worthy of attention. Not a commander. Not a prince. Not a legendary hero with hundreds of victories under his belt. A simple soldier, whose name didn't appear on any list of the galaxy's greatest warriors. The first delegation to arrive at the temple consisted of representatives of the Corviks, an ancient warrior race whose ancestors had tried to don armor 3 times and been rejected 3 times. Their leader, a general named Zarten, stood before Jack with an expression that mingled disbelief and barely concealed contempt. "This is a mistake," he said, his voice echoing off the ancient temple walls. "Xantari armor is meant for true warriors. Creatures whose blood has been spilled in 1,000 battles. Not for this." Jack, still getting used to the weight and strength of the armor on his body, looked at the general calmly. "Perhaps the armor was not what you were looking for," he said simply. Zarten chuckled, but before he could respond, the temple shook again. The armor on Jack's body glowed brighter, and the general, whose eyes had seen thousands of years of his people's military history, felt an ancient force pressing upon him. Not threateningly, but as a reminder that something beyond his comprehension stood before him. He stepped back, feeling something like fear for the first time in a long time. But not everyone greeted Jack with hostility. Among the delegations that arrived at the temple in the following weeks was a young researcher from the Velen race, a peace-loving, scholarly people who specialize in the study of ancient civilizations. Her name was Ira, and unlike the warriors and generals who demanded answers and explanations, she came with questions born of genuine curiosity. "Why you?" she asked one evening as Jack sat alone at the temple entrance, looking at the dying star Catherine slowly fading on the horizon. Jack was silent for a long time before answering. "Honestly, I don't know," he said finally. "I'm no hero. I wasn't the best soldier in my unit. I just—" He paused, searching for the right words. "When the time came, I didn't think about myself. I thought about the people I could save. That's all." Ira studied his face with her large, dark eyes, full of the age-old wisdom of her race. "Perhaps that is why the armor chose you," she said quietly. 99 warriors came here seeking greatness for themselves. You came, dying, because you gave everything for others. The Xantari armor was crafted by beings who saw their own end approaching and yet chose to sacrifice everything for future generations. Perhaps they weren't seeking power. They were seeking a heart like their own. Ira's words stayed with Jack long after she left. Training began almost immediately. Xantari's armor, it turned out, possessed abilities beyond mere physical strength. Jack could see spatial distortions, thin rifts in reality, invisible to the naked eye, through which the darkness penetrated the known universe. He could sense predators approaching light years away, long before any sensors could detect them. The armor strengthened his body so much that he could withstand the pressure of outer space, survive impacts that would shatter an armored ship, and move at speeds beyond the capabilities of a normal human. But that wasn't the most important thing. The armor gave Jack access to the lore of Xantari, millennia of military strategy, accumulated by a race that had dedicated its entire existence to preparing for the battle they knew would one day come. Jack, once a simple soldier in the Border Legion, now carried within him the wisdom of an entire lost civilization. It was a heavy burden. On nights when the entire temple was silent, Jack often awoke from nightmares, not his own, but Xantari memories, echoing in his mind through the connection to his armor. He saw their last cities fall. He heard the cries of their children when the darkness first broke through their defenses millennia ago. He felt the despair of their last king, sending his people fleeing across the stars, knowing most of them would never find safety. These memories nearly broke him in the first weeks. But it was in these dark moments that Jack discovered something that surprised even himself. Human resilience. He grew up hearing stories of people who survived the impossible, soldiers returning from wars that should have broken them, doctors working without sleep to save strangers, ordinary people finding the strength to keep moving forward even after losing everything. This resilience, this stubborn human ability to rise again and again after falling, became the anchor that kept Jack from drowning in the weight of Xantari's memories. He began to do more than just wear armor. He began to become a bridge between two worlds, the ancient wisdom of a lost race and the stubborn, unyielding determination of humanity. The first real test came 3 months later. Human scout ships have discovered another rift, much larger than the one that killed Jack's ship, opening at the edge of the Tau Ceti system, home to a growing human colony of nearly 2 million souls. The dark fleet that emerged from this rift was larger than anything the human race had ever seen. Dozens, perhaps hundreds of creatures, each capable of tearing apart space with their bare hands, moved toward the defenseless colony at a speed that left no time for evacuation. Jack learned of this through the armor's comms a few minutes before the first alarm signal reached human command. He did not hesitate. Ancient Xantari technology, embedded deep within the temple structure, activated a portal of travel, a device that had been dormant for millennia, waiting for the moment. When the new Guardian is ready to fulfill their destiny, Jack stepped through the rift without a second's hesitation, leaving behind a confused and worried Ira, who could only watch as he disappeared into the portal's light. He appeared right in front of the advancing fleet of darkness, alone, in open space, between a defenseless colony and approaching destruction. One man. Against 100 ancient predators capable of tearing apart stars. By all laws of logic, it was suicide. But Jack was no longer just a man. Xantari's armor fully revealed its power for the first time since his awakening, and what happened next forever changed the way the galaxy viewed humanity. The light erupting from the armor created a barrier, not just a shield, but a distortion of space itself, a mirror image of the power the darkness had used to breach the worlds. Jack, guided by the millennia-old wisdom of Xantari and fortified by the stubborn resolve of humanity, met the first wave of attacking creatures with his bare hands, enhanced by ancient technology capable of resisting the forces that tear reality apart. The battle lasted 17 hours. Jack wasn't invincible. He suffered wounds, deep, excruciating wounds that his armor barely had time to heal between attacks. He was on the brink of exhaustion dozens of times, his body screaming with pain and fatigue beyond anything a human had ever experienced. Several times, he was so close to death that he felt his armor begin to fade around him, the connection between his fading consciousness and the ancient power of Xantari beginning to fray. But every time he was ready to give up, he remembered not the glory, not his purpose as a guardian. He remembered the faces of the people below, on the planet he protected. Children playing in parks, unaware of the horror unfolding in the skies above. Parents putting their little ones to bed, believing that tomorrow would come, as it always did. And each time he rose again. By the end of the 17th hour, the Dark Fleet, having lost more creatures in this single battle than in the entire known history of their raids, retreated back through the rift, which began to close under the pressure of the distortions created by Xantari's armor. Jack was left alone in the void of space, barely alive, his body almost completely drained, but the Tau Ceti colony was saved. 2 million lives lived on, unaware of how close they had come to annihilation and unaware of the name of the man who saved them all. News of this battle spread across the galaxy like wildfire. The beings watching the battle through long-range sensors, and there were many, for the entire known universe was now closely monitoring the fate of the awakened Xantari Armor, couldn't believe their eyes. One man. One single warrior from a young, weak race, considered by most barely worthy of serious consideration, single-handedly held off a fleet capable of destroying an entire civilization. General Zarten, the same Corvix warrior who had contemptuously called Jack unworthy of his armor, was among those who watched the battle from afar. When the battle ended, and his sensors confirmed the impossible, one man had stood for 17 hours against 100 darkness creatures. The general sat for a long time in the silence of his command bridge, reviewing everything he thought he knew about strength, honor, and dignity. He arrived at the Xantari temple in person, just a few days later, to find Jack, still recovering from the wounds he had received in the battle, sitting at the entrance to the temple with Era, who had not left his side for a moment since his return through the portal. "I was wrong," Zarten said simply, bowing his head before the man he once despised. Jack, too tired and too human for formalities, merely shook his head. "You're not the only one who's judged by the wrong standards," he said. "Most beings in this galaxy have believed for centuries that strength is measured by muscle, blood, and conquest. Perhaps it's time to measure it by something else." The years that followed this first great battle changed not only the fate of Jack Morton, but the fate of all mankind. The rifts in reality continued to multiply across the galaxy, and the darkness continued to advance wave after wave, but now the universe had a guardian, not an invincible god, not a flawless hero without fear or doubt, but a man. A simple man, bearing the weight of an ancient civilization, struggling daily with his own fears, fatigue, and pain, yet rising again and again because the alternative was unbearable. Other races in the galaxy, observing Jack's exploits, began to reconsider their attitude toward humanity. This young, weak race, once considered insignificant, turned out to be the bearer of something the ancient Xantari had sought for millennia and could not find in any of the 99 mighty warriors who came before Jack. Not by force of body. The strength of a spirit that refused to give up, even when all the odds were stacked against it. The strength of a heart that put the lives of strangers above its own safety. The strength of stubborn, unyielding human resilience that found a way to rise again after every fall, again and again, without end. Humanity, once considered children playing the games of adult civilizations, began to conquer something more valuable than territory or military might: respect. Other races began sending their warriors not to conquer, but to learn from humans, seeking to understand what made this young species capable of producing beings like Jack Morton. And Jack, still a simple soldier at heart despite the ancient power coursing through his veins, continued to do what he always did best. He fought on. Not for glory. Not for recognition. But because somewhere out there, in countless worlds scattered across the galaxy, lived people, ordinary people, children, families, the dreams and hopes of entire civilizations. And as long as there was any strength left in his body, he would not let the darkness take them. The legend of the Xantari Armor, which rejected 100 warriors and accepted a single man, spread across the stars as a reminder to the universe of a simple yet profound truth. True strength has never been measured by how strong you are when all is going well. It was measured by whether you were willing to rise again and again, even when all was lost. Not for yourself, but for those you might never meet but still chose to save. And as long as even one person remembers this truth, darkness will never win.